Krishna devotees, and welcome again back to our continuing series on the glories of Sri Vrindavan Dham. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pashtata Deshatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So today, we're on the eve of Govardhan Puja. Today's Friday, and here in India, in Vrindavan, Govardhan Puja is on Monday. So we would like to begin a small series on the glories of Govardhan Hill. I think that's very appropriate. So let's begin with a few prayers about Giriraj, who's so dear to all the Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis. Namaste Giri Rajaya Shri Govardhana Namine Ashesha Klesha Sa Nasaya Paramananda Dayine. My obeisances to the King of Mountains, who is known as Sri Govardhan. He destroys unlimited obstacles and bestows the highest bliss to devotees. Namo Vrindavanankaya Tubhyam Galoka Maline Purna Brahma Tapatraya Nama Govardhanaya Cha. Obeisances unto Govardhan Hill, the parasol of the Supreme Lord, the crown of Gokula and the resting place of eternal Vrindavan forest. Then from Srimad Bhagavatam 10:21-18, famous verse. Of all the devotees, this Govardhan Hill is the best. O my friends, this hill supplies Krishna and Balaram, along with their calves, cows, and cowherd friends, with all kinds of necessities. Water for drinking, very soft grass, caves, fruits, flowers, and vegetables. In this way, the hill offers respects to the Lord. Being touched by the lotus feet of Krishna and Balaram, Govardhan Hill appears very jubilant. So it's a good introduction to discussion on Giriraj. Of course, most devotees are familiar with the general pastime of Krishna's lifting Govardhan Hill, how Krishna saw his father preparing to worship Lord Indra as a beneficiary of the Vrajavasis. But Krishna convinced Nanda Maharaj that instead everyone should worship Govardhan Hill, because their relationship with Giriraj was much more important. After all, Giriraj was supplying fresh grasses and water to their cows, who were the real source of their livelihood. They're cowherd people, after all, the Vrajavasis. They're cowherd people. There's that famous verse that we quoted from the Bhagavatam the other day, or a couple of months ago. Nanaporo jana pada nagrama nagriha vayam vano kashashtata nityam vanashaila niva shina. My dear Father, our home is not in the cities or towns or villages. Being forest dwellers, we always live in the forest and on the hills. So, as Krishna was speaking to his father, and Nanda Maharaj agreed that they would give up the worship of Indradev and they would worship Govardhan Hill. So Krishna said triumphantly, Tasmad gavam brahmananam andreshchara bayatam makha sa indra yagya samabharash tairayam sadyatam makha. Bhagavatam. He says, therefore may a sacrifice for the pleasure of the cows, the brahmanas, and Govardhan Hill begin. With all the paraphernalia collected for worshipping Indra, let this sacrifice be performed instead. So that's a summary. Many pages of Krishna book and a number of verses from Bhagavatam. But I did that because I'd like to begin focusing on a particular pastime of the pastime of Govardhan Puja, worshipping Govardhan Hill. And that's the great sacrifice that the Vrajavasis held for Giriraj. Let's focus on that today. I've done some research, And I found some very interesting details in regard to that great yajna and the feast that the Vrajavasis offered to Giriraj, part of that yajna. And quite detailed. I think many of you may not have heard some of the details we're going to share with you today about this particular part of the pastime. I've taken my information, the knowledge from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, chapters 24 to 27, from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's Sarartha Dharshani, commentary on the same chapters, from Ananda Vrindavan Champu, it was chapter 15, Gopal Champu, Purva Champu, that part, chapters 18 to 20, and of course, Garga Samhita, chapter 3. It's the source of our knowledge today. So, let's begin. On the day that Nanda Maharaj agreed to worship Govardhan Hill instead of Lord Indra, that evening the Vrajavasis camped on the banks of Manasi Ganga, and they observed the festival of Deepavali, which I think is tomorrow. But really, it's described, all they could think about was the exciting new sacrifice that was scheduled for the following day to worship Govardhan Hill. And overwhelmed by their love for Krishna, the gopas and the gopis paid little mind to the possible results of neglecting Indra. Their only desire was to please Krishna. And anything that interfered with that desire, even if it was an old age tradition of worshiping the demigods, it had no meaning for them, the Vrajavasis. They quickly switched from Indra to worshiping Govardhan Hill because Krishna desired it. So early the next morning, all the Vrajavasis bathed and they dressed and they ornamented themselves very, very nicely. And then they decorated their cows. I thought that was very nice. They decorated themselves and then they decorated their cows, their cow herdsmen. And they decorated their cows with silver bells, pearl necklaces, silk cloths, and then they plated the horns of the cows with gold. And the mother's calves jumped up and down, seeing their mother so richly decorated. And the bulls, it's described that they mooed in the morning mist as if they were great sages chanting morning prayers. The bulls are also, everyone's excited because everyone's fully realized in Vrindavan, fully Krishna conscious, just different rasas to please Krishna in Vrindavan. So the bulls, they mooed in the morning mist as if they were great sages chanting morning prayers. And then all the Vrajavasis started towards the designated place of the sacrifice with their cows, calves, and bulls all in front. But unseen by the Vrajavasis was Lord Shiva riding his carrier Nandi. And he was covered with ashes and decorated with snakes and carrying the Ganges in his matted locks. He was also there. It's also described that having received news of the upcoming worship of Govardhan Hill, various Raja Rishis, yogis, siddhas, and paramahansas, they also joined the procession as it moved along, as did the personified forms of many great mountains. They also participated, because Giriraj is a mountain, so the word spread amongst the sacred mountains like Mount Meru, Mount Drona. Personified, they also joined the group of Vrajavasis going to the sacrifice. And it's written in Shastra that morning Govardhan Hill looked especially beautiful, with its jeweled stones, golden peaks, palatial caves, nectarian streams, and heavenly grasses. Actually, it's described that Giriraj, this is interesting, looked like a young bride on her wedding day. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Giriraj looked like a young bride on her wedding day. And arriving at the place for sacrifice, brahmanas started chanting auspicious mantras, and then began the worship of Govardhan Hill, as Krishna requested. We can just imagine what Indra was thinking, but we won't get into that right now. And they began the worship of Govardhan Hill by coming close to the hill and selecting a rather large Govardhan Shila stone. And they offered him, to begin with, sweet-smelling incense, a selection of wildflowers, a ghee lamp, and finally a camphor lamp. And after that, they offered him a sitting place, symbolically, because obviously the Shila's there, cool water to wash his feet, and a drink to rinse his mouth. Nice description how to worship Giriraj. And after that, the Brahmanas chanted Purusha Shukta. And then they had that famous full abhishek, or bathing, for Giriraj. And it's described that the bathing ceremony for the Govardhan Shila consisted only of pure substances, the best for Krishna. Like, for example, water from the Jamuna River, milk from the best of cows. They would bathe the Shila in milk from the best of cows. They also used some earth from all holy places, honey from the best forest hives, and the richest Panchamrita. They bathed the Lord in Panchamrita. Panchamrita is a mixture of milk, yogurt, ghee, sugar, and honey. Panchamrita. So they would pour those substances individually: milk, yogurt, ghee, sugar, like we do in our abhisheks. And afterwards, they dried Giriraj with very soft towels. So those of you who are Giriraj Bhaktas, you're relishing this because you're hearing how nicely your Lord, our Lord, is being served. Then the Brahmanas, they decorated Giriraj with colorfully embroidered cloth, a variety of precious necklaces, and a regal jewel-studded gold crown. Then all the Vrajavasis, that part was being done by the Brahmanas, of course, but then all the Vrajavasis, they surged forward with beautiful flower garlands, which all of them lovingly placed all over the Shila. You can just imagine the Shila was just covered with these beautiful flower garlands. Then the Vrajavasis, they made very loud, auspicious noises with their drums and their cymbals. Just drums and cymbals. They made various noises, like kirtan or obviously it wasn't just crashing and banging. It was done very beautifully, artistically, but it was so loud that it gave Indra in heaven a terrible earache. I read that. Indra got an earache hearing the Vrajavasis herald this wonderful Govardhan Puja with their drums and cymbals. And afterwards, all the devotees gathered around Govardhan with flowers in hand, and they offered Giriraj Pushpanjali. You know, how we do Pushpanjali, we do like that. Where does it all come from? All these ceremonies we do, these abhisheks and Pushpanjali. You can say it comes from this history, particularly worshipping Giriraj. And then everyone got together and they took auspicious grains and they showered the grains on Giriraj. And then what happened? And then came the famous offerings of food, say bhoga, to Giriraj Govardhan. It's described, well actually when you read about it in Bhagavatam or Garga Samhita or Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, it's very, very, very detailed. It would make this lecture like 2 hours, 3 hours long. But it's written essentially endless varieties of taste, aroma, texture, and color graced a multitude of preparations served in leaf plates, leaf cups, and clay jugs, placed on silk tapestries that were laid end to end on the ground. It's written that neither the kings on earth nor the demigods in heaven had ever offered so many succulent preparations in sacrifice, not even to the greatest of demigods or to the Supreme Being, Lord Narayan. The soups, the breads, vegetables, sweets, cakes, drinks, deep fried things, and other preparations were grouped according to taste. Sour, sweet, salty, bitter, pungent, and astringent. Different types of taste. Sour, sweet, salty, bitter, pungent, and astringent. All for the pleasure of Giriraj. The last offering of food was in the form of a grand hill with peaks, lakes, pastures, and waterfalls made entirely from grains, sweets, and nectar drinks. Shastra says, indeed, it appeared to be a second Govardhan Hill. So big. And it goes on, crowned with a central peak of camphor, glazed with a golden coating of ghee, scented with cloves, camphor, and cardamom. It appeared exactly like Lord Shiva's Mount Kailash. So beautiful. After all these offerings were placed in front of Giriraj, all the Vrajavasis paid him full dandavats. But the acharyas say that none of them were prepared for the way in which Krishna and Giriraj would be reciprocating with them. And how is that? Well, it began by when the Vrajavasis were still down on the ground offering their obeisances, they suddenly heard a great rumbling, like the sound of 100 thundercaps. And when they looked up, they saw a very large and beautiful divine personality standing on top of Govardhan Hill. We know it was Krishna himself, but he was cleverly disguised. But that divine personality was non-different than Govardhan Hill. Jiva Goswami describes this divine person in his Gopal Champu Purva 18th Purana. He says, and I quote, a little technical, but we get the idea of who that personality was. The Vrajavasis were just staring in wonder. But Jiva Goswami says, after the entire annakuta bhoga, which we described, was offered to Giriraj, a mega-sized person of the same appearance as Krishna appeared there. The only reason for people differentiating between the person and Krishna was the size. Writes it quite fancy, but the only difference between Krishna and the person up there was the size. But Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says in his commentary to the Bhagavatam verse 10:24-35, he gives a little bit different description. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. He writes, in order to show the superiority of the sacrifice instituted by himself, meaning Krishna, and to increase the faith of all the Vrajavasis in it, Krishna appeared in another, anyatamam, personal form, rupam, that was like a second mountain standing atop Govardhan. So in this description, it looks like a second mountain, a personal form, but a second mountain. And he gives further description of this form of Krishna on top of Giriraj, who's going to be accepting the offerings. When describing him partaking of the foodstuffs that the Vrajavasis were offering him, he writes, another description of this divine person. He writes, with thousands and millions of hands, which were both short and long, he ate all those offerings from every direction. Thus he filled everyone with joy by eating all the food. So now we hear a description of that divine personality with thousands and millions of hands. And Shastra adds that divine personality had a swarthy complexion, golden garments, glittering ornaments, and a huge flower crown. So they were paying their obeisances after putting all the preparations in front of the hill, and they looked up and there's this divine personality on top of the hill. And as soon as the Vrajavasis saw this Krishna, divine person, he sat down on a peak of Govardhan Hill, as if it were a throne, directly facing the Vrajavasis. And it's described his eyes were rolling in ecstatic bliss, and his arms were swaying like vines in the wind. And adding to the wonder of this huge personality was that he was simultaneously seated in one place on a peak of Govardhan Hill, but also they saw him as spread throughout the length of the entire mountain as well, like the Lord's universal form. This is quite esoteric, but it's nectar, Krishna's pastimes. It's described that some of the Vrajavasis, they thought that this personality was a mirage caused by the overlapping of shadow and light. Others thought that it was, or he was, the mountain personified. And still others thought, oh, it's Krishna himself. And the cows and bulls were also staring at this towering figure with grass hanging from their mouths. And all the little calves present, they hid under the stomachs of their mothers for protection. And the deer, the rabbits, peacocks and parrots, and all the other creatures living around Govardhan Hill, they simply stopped whatever they were doing and they were stunned. And the sight of this divine person made their fur, feathers, and hairs stand on end. The deer, the rabbits, the peacocks, the parrots, all the creatures, with the sight of this divine person made their fur, feathers, and hairs stand on end. That we can understand, again, because everything in Vrindavan is personified. And everything and everyone loves Krishna more than anyone's ever been loved before. So it's not surprising that these realized souls, their fur stand on their feathers and all stood on end. Because all the Vrajavasis were a little apprehensive, a little fearful, they weren't saying anything, just like staring at this beautiful, majestic, divine personality. And so Krishna, it's described, he stood up and with joined palms, he respectfully addressed his own expansion, essentially, saying, "O Lord, who are you?" And at first this divine form again rumbled like thunderclouds, and all the cowherd boys, they thought, oh, now we're finished. But then he replied to Krishna's question in a, how is it described? A hushed voice full of compassion. This divine form said, "O little boy with graceful limbs, and all residents of Vrindavan, I am Govardhan Hill, the presiding deity of this place. I have appeared because I am pleased with your devotion. Please ask me for anything according to your heart's desire." Ask me anything according to your heart's desire. So what does the heart of a Vaishnava want? Only the pleasure of Krishna. This is the nature of the Vrajavasis' love. But that proclamation that the divine form, Krishna, Giriraj personified on the top of the hill, said, it resounded and echoed throughout Braja. And by the sound of his words, the Vrajavasis lost all fear, and everyone chanted, Jai, 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 Jai Giriraj, Govardhan Lalavam Sevalaki. However, it's interesting, most of the Vrajavasis didn't think that the divine personality on Govardhan Hill was Krishna himself. It's described even Vrindavaneshwari, Shrimati Radharani, who it's described can always detect Krishna's presence. This is one of her qualities, Sri Radha. She can always detect Krishna's presence. I thought that was beautiful. She was fooled by this clever disguise. Now, how do we know? Well, this we know, it's mentioned by Sri Raghunath Das Goswami in his sacred Braj Vilas Stava. Such a wonderful book he wrote. It's not very long, but Braj Vilas Stava, very detailed description of Vrindavan and all the the great personalities there. I read it at least every other day. This is how you keep in touch with Braj. And it's text 75. So listen carefully and you'll see that it appears that Radharani was a little, she was unable to detect Krishna there because of this clever disguise that he took, appearing on top of the mountain. So Raghunath Das Goswami says, and I quote, "When Braja's king offered a great quantity of foodstuff to Govardhan Hill, Krishna, the enemy of Aghasura, assumed a gigantic form, proclaimed that he was actually Govardhan Hill, invited everyone to ask boons from him, and, fooling even Shrimati Radharani, ate all the offered food. Let me take shelter of the Annakuta festival, when Lord Krishna enjoyed these pastimes." Annakuta festival, the offerings of so many wonderful preparations to Giriraj. But then Krishna, to convince his people that he himself was the divine person and non-different from Govardhan Hill, he raised his arms. Krishna raised his arms and he said, "O residents of Braja, let us all offer respectful obeisances to this invincible deity who has manifested his divine form before our very eyes." Then Krishna fell down on the ground and offered prostrated obeisances. It's described to himself in the form of the deity atop Govardhan Hill. This is esoteric, but it's relishable. Then the deity on top of the hill, the deity on top of the hill said, "O people of Braja, I am not like other deities who remain aloof somewhat from their worshippers. I reciprocated your faith by appearing before you, and now I will personally eat all your offerings." So speaking like this, the personified form of Govardhan Hill extended his right hand and began to eat all the food that had been offered to him. Rice, vegetables, sweets, savories, drinks, everything. And with each mouthful, he grew larger and larger. And it's described more and more blissful. Govardhan was eating with his right hand, and with his left hand he was motioning. It's described by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. With his left hand he was motioning, saying, bring me more, aniyor, aniyor." We've all heard that, aniyor, aniyor, bring me more. But there's a nice detail. With his left hand he was encouraging like this, bring me more, aniyor. Little detail for you there. And that place eventually became known as Aniyor, a little village that we walk through when we do Govardhan Parikrama. Very beautiful, quaint little village of Vrajavasis. And as he ate, the Vrajavasis kept bringing him more foodstuffs because he wanted more, until they had emptied their stocks in their homes of all fruits, all grains, vegetables, and milk products. Finally, when they had nothing else left to cook or offer, out of fear of offending this beautiful deity, they turned to Lord Balaram. So we don't have anything left to offer. He's eating everything. He's accepted our devotion through the foodstuffs, but we want to keep offering him our devotion. We don't have any more foodstuffs to offer. So Balaram did something very historic. He offered a simple tulsi leaf to the giant deity. And that deity, Krishna, was fully satisfied. And just by that alone, we can understand how important is the worship of Brinda Devi, Tulsi Maharani in our daily activities. Brinda Devi has appeared in the world of men as the plant, the Tulsi plant. And Prabhupada said, no offering is complete without the leaves of the Tulsi plant on the offering. So that was made very clear by Lord Balaram. He accepted everything because of one Tulsi leaf, the deity. And when he had finished eating everything, the deity of Govardhan, I'd never heard this before, he rinsed his mouth with water from a nearby lake and spit it out behind him, causing a lush grassland, we say in English savanna, a lush grassland to magically appear. Finally, he picked his teeth with bamboo canes and sweetened his mouth by chewing a few cartloads of betel nuts, it's described. He sweetened his mouth by chewing a few cartloads of betel nuts. And at that point, the Vrajavasis wanted to offer arati to the deity, like we do. We learn from this, but we make the offering, and after offering, there's the artik. So the Vrajavasis wanted to offer artik to that amazing personality on the top of Govardhan Hill, but they were a little embarrassed because they couldn't find a lamp large enough. He's a big deity to match the size of the deity on the hill. So Krishna himself manifested a gigantic tray with thousands of flames, which all the Vrajavasis lifted together and offered together. It must have been quite big that all the Vrajavasis together could lift that tray with thousands of flames burning and offer to the Lord like that. So sweet. So that was that. That was the yajna, that was the annakuta ceremony where they offered all the prasadam, and I hope you appreciated those details. And so now that Krishna, in the form of Giriraj Govardhan, had been satisfied, the Lord had been satisfied, the Vrajavasis naturally turned to their beloved cows, knowing that those cows are very dear to him and worshipable, and for themselves are the very source of subsistence for the cowherd people of Vrindavan. So they love the cows, and the cows dearly love them. So the Vrajavasis decided that they would worship the cows. So they decorated and they ornamented the cows, and then they set them free to mingle with their calves. But when the cows were offered, when they offered those cows the opportunity to munch or to eat on the best of grasses, surprisingly, those cows would not eat the grass. So once described, one wise cowherd man called out to Krishna, "O Gopal, our cows will not eat unless you sweeten these grasses with the touch of your lotus hands. Nothing else will satisfy them. Please come and fill each cow with delight. Our cows will not eat unless you sweeten the grasses with the touch of your lotus hands." So Krishna at once expanded himself into as many forms as there were cows. And he fed them all and scratched their heads with his own hands. He expanded to each cow, fed them, touched the grass and fed them, and then scratched their heads with his own hands. And it's described very beautifully that when the cows saw Krishna, he entered into their hearts. The cows looked at him, and then simultaneously he entered into their hearts. And it's written that with that, they were filled with such bliss that they became indifferent to their calves, in much the same way that prema yogis become indifferent to the world. That was a beautiful analogy one acharya gave. When Krishna entered their hearts, those cows, they were filled with such bliss, they became indifferent to their calves, in much the same way that prema yogis, it's another great name, prema yogi, that prema yogis become indifferent to the world. And to conclude their worship of the cows, the Vrajavasis, they were supposed to circumambulate all of the cows. But that was a problem because Nanda Maharaj has 900,000 cows. And there were so many cows that to go around them for all the Vrajavasis was something like impossible. So Krishna suggested that they circumambulate just one cow. And he said that would give them the same auspicious benefit as circumambulating them all. We can also do like that. Why not? We're following in the footsteps of Vrajavasis. We want to become like Vrajavasis. We want to be like them in every manner, in every way. So we can't imitate them, but we can follow in their footsteps at this point. We can circumambulate a cow. And Krishna, he explained the logic, or you could say the transcendental wisdom behind that. Krishna said, just as one nourishes all the leaves and branches of a tree by watering its roots, so we can simultaneously adore all our cows and bulls by circumambulating just one cow and one bull. Analogy we've heard in other ways as well. Then, after worshipping all the cows and bulls, the Vrajavasis worshipped all the calves. Just see how important cow protection is. I read Prabhupada said one time that World War I and World War II were the result of the karma that the world had accumulated because of the killing of so many cows. I don't generally say that publicly, but Prabhupada said that, so we could also repeat that. Cows, the protection of cows is so essential to material and spiritual prosperity. But that's another lecture. So after worshipping all the cows and bulls, the Vrajavasis worshipped the calves. And how did they do that? By decorating them with cloth, by painting pictures on their bodies, and then blissfully, the word they use is frolicking. It's translated like frolicking, kind of an old English word, frolicking. Blissfully playing with the frolicking's better actually. Anyway, frolicking with the cows. Then Krishna made the frisky calves lay down to rest by playing special sounds on his flute. Then the cowherd boys circumambulated the calves, and then the boys paid the calves respectful obeisances. Dandavats, down on the ground. They paid the cows respectful obeisances. And Krishna was pleased with the boys when he saw them offering obeisances to the cows. So he said something I found very significant. Listen, he said, quote, "At the heart of devotion to the cows is the act of offering obeisances to them." At the heart of devotion to the cows is the act of offering obeisances to them. So after reading that and now speaking on that, I have no hesitation. When I go to the Goshala, we have a Goshala 2 minutes away from where I am. They're Gir cows. Gir cows are those cows from Gujarat. They're reddish color and they have those long floppy ears. They're so cute. They give the best milk. So here, where I'm staying, we're drinking that cow's milk. They milk them about 6 in the morning, and by 6:15, we boil that milk and then I drink that milk. I have it for lunch. I have it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So when I go to get that milk from the Gir, I'm going to offer obeisances. And if anyone laughs, I'm going to care. What does Krishna say? Krishna said to his friends, the cowherd boyfriends, at the heart of devotion to the cows is the act of offering obeisances to them. So, Giriraj had been worshipped, the cows had been worshipped, and the calves had been worshipped. So then the Vrajavasis, they thought, worship of the cows should include worship of the cowherd boys. Worship of the cows should include worship of the cowherd boys. So many details we get from the scriptures I quoted earlier. So the Vrajavasis, the elders, they set about giving elaborate baths to the boys, dressing the boys, ornamenting them, and garlanding each and every one of them. Krishna, Balaram, and all their friends. Then prasadam was served to everyone present. And there was a lot of prasadam. It's described, it was served to, whether one was a king, an untouchable, a buffalo, a dog, a tiger, or a deer. Those are the exact words by the acharyas. Whether they were a king, an untouchable, a buffalo, a dog, a tiger, or a deer. And Prabhupada encourages this when we read in Krishna book. He says that the ceremony of Govardhan Puja should include distributing food to animals, to dogs and to cows and monkeys, of course, in Vrindavan like that. That's a particular feature of the Govardhan Puja festival. But specifically, the acharyas say, a king, an untouchable, a buffalo, a dog, a tiger, a deer. So if you have some tigers nearby, make sure they get prasadam. Then after finishing their meal, the Vrajavasis rested. And after everyone woke up, Krishna pointed to this majestic, gorgeous, very beautiful deity on the hill. And joining his palms, Krishna said, "This hill has appeared in person and bestowed his mercy upon us. Therefore, let us pay our obeisances to him again and again for the safety of our cows and ourselves." And all the Vrajavasis, they obeyed Krishna's command and bowed down to Govardhan Hill. But when they stood up, suddenly the deity disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. Yes. So that, dear devotees, was how the Vrajavasis performed their puja of Govardhan Hill, Govardhan Puja, and respected the prasadam and respected each other as Vaishnavas do. And this is Govardhan Puja. Now, we can go on a little bit. In Garga Samhita 3.1.27.28, Krishna gives explicit instructions on how to observe Govardhan Puja, whether one lives near or far away from Govardhan Hill. Whether one lives near or far away from Govardhan. Meaning that if you're a Govardhan Vasi and you live at the foot of Govardhan Hill, then you know what to do. It's very simple. These articles are all there and the pastimes there. But what if someone lives in London or New York or Sydney or Moscow or Kiev or Almaty or Tashkent or Wellington or whatever? We're so far away. But Garga Samhita gives instructions how you can properly worship Govardhan Hill from a distance and get the same benefit. And in Garga Samhita, Krishna is speaking in this third chapter. The third chapter of Garga Samhita is all about Giriraj and worshiping Giriraj, and a really amazing pastime I'm going to conclude with later on in the talk. But Krishna says, if you live far away, you should make a model of Govardhan Hill out of cow dung, as we see the Vrajavasis do themselves. You see, they make the cow dung cow dung deity of Giriraj on the ground, and then they worship from there. Make a model of Govardhan Hill out of cow dung. Decorate that hill with many flowers. It can either be done on the ground like they do here in Vrindavan, or you can, like we do mainly in our ISKCON temples, we make a big mountain of olive with blueberries or strawberries and lakes, of milk or different juices and sweet balls, So you either or, you make the Gobar deity, cow dung deity, or you make a nice mountain of sweets like that. And you decorate the hill with many flowers and blades of grass, Krishna says. And he says, networks of vines. And then you worship, like the Vrajavasis, we heard they worship. And he says that in Garga Samhita, Krishna says, a person who elaborately worships Govardhan Hill, it's done with great opulence, elaborately worships Govardhan Hill, year after year, attains all happiness in this life, and he becomes liberated. He goes back to Godhead in the next life. Interesting. We never think that statements in Shastra are exaggeration, but we have to live up to them, become qualified devotees to get the full benefit. Now, as we know, a devotee can also worship Govardhan from far away, even in a foreign country, if they're fortunate enough to have a Govardhan Shila. What is a Govardhan Shila? Actually, in Sanskrit, Shila means stone, but we prefer instead of saying Govardhan stone, it's nicer to say Govardhan Shila because we understand the sacred nature of that Shila as being non-different than Krishna. And this is the deity of the Lord. The deities appear in many ways, but Prabhupada said they're the mercy incarnation of the Lord, in that incarnations come and go throughout the millenniums, but the deities stay. There's one deity I know at Nrsimhapali in Mayapur, a deity of Nrsimhadev that the pujaris say has been there since Satya Yuga. So Lord may come and go according to his will and his desires, but the deities stay. So Prabhupada said deities are mercy incarnations of the Lord. And that is true with the Govardhan Shila. There's no need to install a Govardhan Shila because, as we've been discussing, Govardhan is non-different than Krishna. And some devotees, they worship the Shila as Krishna himself. Some devotees, they worship him as the best devotee of Krishna. We'll be discussing that in further lectures. Some devotees worship a Govardhan Shila as Balaram or Radharani, but the acharyas say, how do we see all these differences? It's based on one's bhav, or one's devotion. How one according to one's devotion, how he sees the Govardhan Shila, that Govardhan Shila is worshipped in different ways. But we'll be discussing that in another lecture in the series on Govardhan Puja, or Govardhan Hill, let us say. So as for Govardhan Shilas, if one's fortunate enough to have one, can one have one? Of course, the tradition is that one generally or should ask his spiritual master for permission to worship Govardhan Shila. But in Krishna book, Prabhupada gives a very broad understanding. In chapter 24, Prabhupada writes, quote, "The identity of Krishna and Govardhan Hill is still honored, and great devotees take rocks, Shilas from Govardhan Hill, and worship them exactly as they worship the deity of Krishna in the temples. The followers of the Krishna conscious movement may therefore collect small rocks or pebbles from Govardhan Hill and worship them at home, because this worship is as good as deity worship." So there Prabhupada gives credence for devotees to worship the Govardhan Shilas, although we know that when he was present, he was very cautious to introduce even the worship of Shalagram Shila. Not that he didn't want to introduce it, but in a purport in Chaitanya Charitamrita, I don't have it before me, but Prabhupada says that he's just waiting for his disciples to come to the standard of Brahminical standard, sattva, to become in the mode of goodness. And then he would introduce the worship of Shalagram Shila, and that would also indicate Govardhan Shila. And before Prabhupada left, he was allowing devotees to worship the Shalagram Shila and also the Govardhan Shila. I know at New Mayapur in France, when someone came from Govardhan Hill and left a Govardhan Shila at New Mayapur, and we put it in Prabhupada's room. And when Prabhupada came, we asked him to see, and he said, "Yes, this is Giriraj," and he said that you can continue, you can worship the Giriraj Shila there at New Mayapur, other places as well. But again, the onus is on us to come up to the standard of being good pujaris in the mode of goodness, and even more important, Suddha Sattva, transcendentalists, so we can please Krishna with our loving sentiments, our pure devotion. So this, Govardhan Shilas. In this light, we know that Lord Chaitanya gave Raghunath Das Goswami a Govardhan Shila from his own hand. That's described in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Anjalila 6294. Prabhu Kahe, meaning Mahaprabhu speaking, E Shila Krishnara Vigraha, Hara Seva Tara Tumi Kariya a graha. He said to Raghunath Das Goswami, this stone is a transcendental form of Lord Krishna. Worship the stone with great eagerness. Be very eager to worship Krishna. And he also gave him a gunjamala, a string of colored seeds, three types of colored, the same seeds but different colors, three, that are commonly grown, you find them around the Vrindavan area. They're black, they're yellow, and they're red. And strung together, they represent Srimati Radharani. And how is that so? Because Radharani has a yellow golden complexion, her lips are red, and she wears black mascara on her eyes. So you see those gunjamalas. They're black, yellow, and red, and they represent Radharani because she's golden, her lips are red, and she wears black mascara on her eyes. That's an explanation of that beautiful gunja mala. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he said to Das Goswami, he said, Giriraj is Krishna, and Gunjadhari represents Radharani. So we know that Raghunath Das Goswami worshipped that Govardhan Shield with great devotion the rest of his life. Now in Garga Samhita, chapter 3, text 31, there's a description of the benefits, or one of the many benefits of worshipping a Govardhan Shila. This is, again, chapter 3 of Garga Samhita. Begins with text 31, and that text reads, Krishna is speaking, Giriraja Shila Shevam Ya Karoti Dvijo Tama Sapta Dvipa Mahi Tirtha Vagaha Phalam Iti Saha. Krishna says, an exalted Brahmana who regularly serves a stone from Govardhan Hill attains the result of having bathed in all the holy rivers and lakes in the 7 worlds. But then he warns in the same chapter, a person who has a mountain of gold but does not use it to worship a Shila he has taken from Govardhan Hill goes to a terrible hell. In other words, you have to give your all to worshipping the Govardhan Shila. So in Vrindavan, or far from Vrindavan, we can worship Giriraj carefully by his mercy and obtain so much benefit. The ultimate benefit, of course, is Krishna Prema. In Mahaprabhu, he told Raghunath Das Goswami, if you worship this Shila properly, as he gave directions, he said, in that Shila you will directly see the son of Maharaj Nanda. Now I mentioned a pastime that I'd like to conclude today with, and it's a very amazing pastime. It's there in the Garga Samhita again, illustrating and highlighting how pure the worship is, or how powerful the Govardhan Shila is. It's in, third part of Garga Samhita, chapter 10 and 11. I like that. The third part of Garga Samhita, chapter 10 and 11. So, at the beginning of chapter 10, Narada Muni is speaking, and he says, quote, the following is a most ancient history of Goloka. When one hears it, all sins are destroyed. So listen carefully, and at least all your sins will be destroyed. He says that one day, following in the footsteps of great sages and his ancestors, a certain Brahmana, his name was Vijay, went to Mathura. And there at that point, the Gargamita describes that holy place that removes all sins. And that Brahmana Vijay, after performing his religious duties, he went to Govardhan Hill. And while doing parikrama, he picked up one of the stones there, one of the shilas, without knowing or really understanding its sacred nature. He was a pious person. He went to Mathura, following in the footsteps of saintly persons, and when you come to Mathura, you come to Vrindavan, and when you're in Vrindavan, you do Govardhan Parikrama. So this pious person, Vijay, Brahmana, he's walking around Giriraj and he picks up a stone. And he continues on his way. He visits different forests in Vrindavan, and finally he passes out of Braj on his way to his next destination. And all of a sudden, he sees this ferocious Rakshasa approaching him. And listen to the description of the Rakshasa. He had 3 heads, 3 chests, 6 legs, 3 hands, enormous lips, and a massive nose. And his 7 hands long tongue, what's 7 hands? 7 hands long tongue moved to and fro. And the hairs on his body were like a tangle of thorns, and his eyes were red. And he had long, curved, frightening fangs. And as this Rakshasa lunged forward to devour Vijay, and with no other recourse to defend himself, the Brahmana, he had a stone, right? He threw the stone. To protect him, he threw the stone, the Govardhan Shila, at the monster. And when the demon was hit by the Govardhan Shila, he immediately gave up his body. The Rakshasa died. But out from his body became a very handsome person with large lotus petal eyes, dressed in yellow garments, garlanded with forest flowers, wearing a crown and earrings, holding a flute and a stick, is described as beautiful and glorious as Kamadev, and with some of his features resembling divine personalities. So this handsome person immediately folded his hands and bowed down before Vijay the Brahmana again and again. And rising up, he said to the Brahmana, to Vijay, "O best of the Brahmanas, you earnestly work for the salvation of others. O noble-hearted one, now you have rescued me from a cruel fate. Good fortune seems to have come to me by the touch of that sacred stone." So Vijay spoke, he said, "Sacred stone?" He said, "Sir, I'm astonished by your words. I certainly have no power to deliver you or anyone. I don't know how, but simply by that stone's touch, this has all happened. O saintly one, perhaps you can tell me how this has happened." So then that Rakshasa, who was transformed into a handsome person with all pious features, they refer to him now in the scripture as the liberated soul. So the liberated soul said, "Glorious Govardhan Hill, the king of mountains, is the personal form of Lord Krishna. Simply by seeing it, a person attains the supreme goal of life. By seeing Govardhan Hill, one attains a pious result many times greater than the result of a pilgrimage to Mount Gandha Mandana. O Brahmana, simply by visiting Govardhan Hill, one attains piety 100,000 times greater than the piety he would attain if on the sacred mountain of Rishabha or Kutaka or Kolaka, and had worshipped many Brahmanas and given charity 10 million cows with golden horns to the pious. By going on pilgrimage to Govardhan Hill, one attains piety 10 million times greater than the piety he would attain by going on pilgrimage to Rishamukha or Devagiri. There never was, nor will there ever be, a holy place equal to Govardhan Hill." Then Narada Muni, he continues because he's narrating this pastime. He says that when Vijay heard the liberated soul speak like that, he became struck with wonder. And he asked the liberated soul another question, because that soul seemed very aware of the power and glory of Govardhan Hill. So the Brahmana Vijay, he said, Sir, can you tell me who you were in your previous birth? What sin did you commit? O fortunate one, you have spiritual eyes to see all this directly. So that liberated soul was previously a Rakshasa. He said, yes, just to show, actually, this is just to show how pure and potent is the Govardhan Shila, ultimately. He said, in my previous birth I was a wealthy Vaishya son. From childhood I was a compulsive gambler. I was very fallen. I became a drunkard, addicted to chasing prostitutes. O Brahmana, my father, mother, and wife warned me again and again. Then one day, with poison, I killed my parents with poison. And with a sword, I killed my wife on the road. Then I took all their money and went with my lover in the south, where I became a merciless thief. One day I threw my lover into a blind well and left her there to die. Indeed, with ropes, I killed many hundreds of people as I robbed them. O Brahmana, I was so greedy after money that as a highwayman I murdered many hundreds of Brahmanas and many thousands of Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Sudras. Then one day I was hunting deer in the forest and I stepped on a snake. The snake bit me and I died. Then the fearsome Yamadutas came and they beat me with terrible clubs and they tied me up and dragged me, a great sinner, to hell. And I fell into the terrible hell named Kumbhipaka. And I stayed there for a manvantara. For a kalpa I was forced to embrace a red-hot iron statue of a woman. I, a great sinner, greatly suffered. By the desire of Yamaraj, I was thrown into 8,400,000 different hells. Then my karma took me to Bharat Varsha. For 10 births I was a pig, and for 100 births I was a tiger. For 100 more births I was a camel. For 100 more births I was a buffalo. For 1,000 births I was a snake, and wicked men killed me again and again. O Brahmana, after 10,000 years of these births, I was born in a desert as a grotesque and wicked Rakshasa. One day I assumed the form of a Sudra and I went to Braj. I came near to Vrindavan in the sacred Jamuna, but with sticks in their hands, some children beat me severely and I fled from the land of Vrindavan. Hungry for many days, I came here to eat you, just outside of Vrindavan. Then you hit me with that sacred Shila, non-different than Bhagavan Shri Krishna himself, that Shila from Govardhan Hill. Thus, by Lord Krishna's causeless mercy, I became the most fortunate person. And as that liberated soul was speaking, a chariot, it's described as splendid as 1,000 suns and drawn by 1,000 horses, suddenly descended from Goloka Vrindavan. And it's described that the chariot rumbled with 1,000 wheels. It was extremely beautiful, and it contained 100,000 very beautiful associates of the Lord. It also had, it's described, a network of bells and tinkling ornaments that sounded very pleasantly. So the Brahman and the liberated soul, they both bowed down before the chariot. Then the liberated soul climbed into the chariot, and having lost all interest in the material world, the acharyas say, he went to Krishna's beautiful abode. That abode is described, it's graceful with many pastime gardens, and the pastime concludes that place is the highest of all spiritual realms. And that was that wicked monster Rakshasa who was sinful for so many, many lifetimes, was purified by the touch of a Govardhan Shila. All his sins were rectified, his material desires were thrown to a distant place, And somehow or other, by Krishna's mercy, the prema that's required to go back to Goloka Vrindavan manifested in his heart. And he went back to Godhead. So we can achieve the same destination by worshipping Giriraj. It may take a little bit longer, but it's part of our, very integral part of our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. As we see in Vrindavan everywhere, the Vaishnavas are worshipping Giriraj, and Rakanath Das Goswami had Giriraj, and we heard so much about the beautiful annakuta ceremony at Govardhan Hill. So Giriraj is an integral part of our culture. All glories to Giriraj, Maharaj, Govardhan, the key. So I'd like to conclude today with a very beautiful song that the Braja Gopis often sing, then and now, that's been revealed to us from the pen, or you could say from the heart, of Srila Jiva Goswami. It's found in his Gopal Champu. It's entitled Giri Pujayam Vihitam Vena. Giri Pujayam Vihitam Vena. In the song, one group of gopis is asking a question, and another group of gopis is giving a reply. And it's all about Govardhan Puja. And it's written by Jiva Goswami. And it's there in his books. It's there. Gopal Champu in the book. So it's very simple, but very sublime. So it goes like this. There's 10 verses. Giri Pujam Vihitam Kena Arachi Sakara Padam Abhayam Yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? And the other gopi answers, the one who bestowed fearlessness against demons, even unto the post of Indra. Giri Pujam Vihitam Kena, one gopi is asking. Putanika sa nihata yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? And the other gopi says, the one whom Putana was killed. The one by whom Putana was killed. Giri Pujam Vihitam Kena. Trunivarta Tanu Dalayam Yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? The one by whom Trinivarta's body was crushed into pieces. Giri Pujayam Vihitam Kena. Yamalarjuna Tarur Udakaliyena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? The one by whom the 2 Arjuna trees were uprooted. Giri Pujam Vihitam Kena. Vatsa Bakasura Hananam Yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? The one by whom Vatsasura and Bakasura were killed. Then the gopi says, Giri Pujam Vihitam Kena. And the other gopi replies, Vyomak Asura Maranam Yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? The one by whom Vyomasura and Agasura were killed. Giri Pujam Vihitam Kena. Kali Dhamanam Kalitam Yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja, this worship of Govardhan Hill? The one by whom Kaliya Dhamana was performed. Giri Pujam Vihitam Kena. Kara Palam Baka Shamanam Yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? The one by whom Denakasura and Pralambasura were silenced. Giri Pujam Vihitam Kena. Dava Yugmam Paripitam Yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? The one by whom the 2 forest fires were extinguished. And then Giri Pujayam Vihitam Kena. Tarsyati Kamsha Satatam Yena. Who arranged this Giri Puja? And the gopi says, the one whom Kamsa is constantly put into indignation. Hare Krishna. All glories to Jiva Goswami. So nice to find that in Gopal Champu. The gopis questioning, or asking a question and answer about the person who arranged all of that Govardhan Puja for our benefit, Sri Krishna himself. So, thank you. we'll be continuing with a few more lectures on Govardhan Hill now that that time of year has come. But I think that next Tuesday we'll speak about Srila Prabhupada, because next Wednesday is Srila Prabhupada's disappearance day. So we'll take a little break from Giriraj and we'll speak about Prabhupada, and then we'll go back to Giriraj. So today's Friday, and Tuesday we'll speak about Prabhupada. I think we'll specifically focus on Srila Prabhupada in Sri Vrindavan Dham. That will fit into our series of lectures here. We'll speak about Prabhupada in Vrindavan next Tuesday, just the day before his sacred disappearance day. Thank you, everyone, once again. Giriraj Maharaj, Govardhan ki, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani ki, Giriraj Govardhan Amsewala ki, back home, back to Godhead, Goloka Vrindavan Dham ki. Take all the unfortunate fallen souls who have not heard about Krishna consciousness yet back home with us, giving the greatest pleasure to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you. See you soon. Hare Krishna.